HOA Karen chopped down my 150-year-old tree. Then blamed me when it crushed her house. Yes, you heard that right. My neighbor, my HOA, and a tree that had stood for over a century. All collided in one unbelievable storm of drama. A tree older than all of us, cut down without my permission. A neighbor's house, destroyed by the very tree she wanted gone. And me, left standing in the middle of the blame game. But what happened after will leave you speechless. Welcome, my friends, to HOA Max Stories, where real drama meets real homeowners. My name is David. I live in a quiet little town in Georgia. I'm just an ordinary homeowner, but when it comes to HOA drama, my life has been anything but ordinary. If you've ever had a run-in with an HOA, or a neighbor who thinks they own the whole street, you're going to want to stay right here with me. And hey, before we dive deep into this wild story, do me a small favor. Hit that subscribe button. Think of it the way you'd wave back to an old neighbor across the fence. It takes just a second, but it means the world to me. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing from folks all across the US and even beyond. Now, let's begin. I still remember that morning as if it was yesterday. The air was quiet, the sky was clear, but something felt different. It was one of those mornings where you wake up and feel like the world is about to throw something at you. I stepped outside, coffee in my hand, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Birds were singing. The street was calm. My big old oak tree, the one that had been standing tall for over 150 years, was there, just like always. Strong. Majestic. Beautiful. That tree wasn't just wood and leaves to me, it was history. It was family. My grandfather planted it when he first bought this land. My father used to sit under it every Sunday with his paper. I grew up climbing its branches, scraping my knees, pretending it was a castle tower. It wasn't just a tree, it was part of me. It was part of my home. But life has a strange way of changing in an instant, and sometimes, that instant comes from the person you least expect. Karen. My HOA neighbor. She had moved into the neighborhood not long ago. Brand new house, brand new furniture, and brand new attitude. The kind of neighbor who complains about everything. The mailbox being an inch too high. The grass being too wild. The color of the fence not matching the community standards. And then, she set her eyes on my tree. At first, it was little comments. Oh, that tree blocks my view of the sunset. Or, that tree is dropping too many leaves in the street. I laughed it off. I thought it was nothing. But soon, her complaints grew louder. She started calling the HOA. She started sending me letters. She even knocked on my door once and said, "That tree is dangerous. If it falls, it will destroy everything." I told her the truth. That tree was strong. I had it checked. More than once. Every expert said the same thing, it was healthy, sturdy, safe. But Karen didn't care about experts. She cared about getting her way. Weeks went by. I ignored her nonsense. I thought the HOA would too. But then one morning, everything changed. I pulled into my driveway after work, and the sound hit me before the sight did. The buzzing of chainsaws. The crack of wood splitting. The shouting of workers. And then I saw it. My heart dropped. My tree, my beautiful oak, was lying across my yard. Cut down. Gone. I froze. Coffee slipped right out of my hand. It felt like the air had been sucked out of my chest. And there she was. Karen. Standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, with a smug little smile on her face. I shouted, "What the hell are you doing? This is my tree. This is my land." She shrugged. "Oh, the HOA approved it," she said, almost laughing. "Don't worry. I did you a favor." A favor? She had chopped down 150 years of history. A piece of my family. And she called it a favor. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag the workers away. But by then, it was too late. The damage was done. The tree was down. And let me tell you something, you don't just cut down a tree like that without paying a price. Sometimes, nature takes its revenge. For weeks, the huge trunk lay there, right near the edge of Karen's yard. She said she would handle it. She said not to worry. But she never did. Then one night, a storm rolled in. Heavy rain. Howling wind. The kind of storm that shakes your windows and rattles your bones. And in the middle of that storm, I heard the loudest crash of my life. I ran outside in the rain, lightning flashing across the sky. And there it was. The fallen remains of my oak tree had crashed right into Karen's shiny new house. The roof caved in. Glass everywhere. Her porch destroyed. And for one small moment, I'll admit it, I felt justice. It wasn't my doing. It wasn't planned. It was nature reminding Karen of one simple truth. You don't mess with what you don't understand. But the real storm wasn't the one in the sky. It was the one that came the next morning. Because Karen didn't take responsibility. She didn't say sorry. She didn't even admit it was her idea to cut the tree down. No, she did something worse. She pointed at me. And she said, "This is your fault." She told the HOA I was to blame. She told the police. She even told her insurance company. She said it was his tree. His land. His problem. Can you imagine the anger boiling inside me? First she takes my tree. Then nature destroys her house because of her decision. And now she blames me? That moment, standing in the rain, watching her scream at me, pointing her finger. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about a tree anymore. This was war. And believe me, I was ready to fight back. But let me ask you something. If this happened to you, if your neighbor destroyed something you loved, and then tried to blame you for the fallout, what would you do? Would you fight them head-on, or would you let the HOA push you around? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know. The storm had passed, but the real chaos was just beginning. The morning after, I walked outside and saw the destruction with my own eyes. Karen's house looked like a war zone. The roof was split open. Pieces of wood and brick scattered across the lawn. Rainwater dripping from broken windows. And Karen, standing there, arms waving in the air, yelling so loudly the whole neighborhood could hear. Her face was red with fury. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shocked, she was angry. And all that anger? It was aimed at me. She shouted, "This is your fault. Your tree. Your problem." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I shouted back, "You cut it down. You hired those workers. You made this mess." But she just smirked, the way only Karen could smirk, and said, "Not according to the HOA." And that's when I realized, she wasn't just blaming me in front of neighbors. She had already called the HOA. She had already called the police. She was making this official. Within an hour, the HOA president pulled up. A man named Robert, a stiff, gray-haired guy who always wore suits even on weekends. He walked over with a clipboard in his hand, looking serious. "David," he said, "we need to talk." I could already feel my blood pressure rising. Talk? What was there to talk about? Robert cleared his throat and said, "Karen has filed a complaint. She claims your tree caused severe property damage to her home. We'll need to investigate, and we may have to hold you financially responsible." I nearly laughed in his face. Are you kidding me? That tree was cut down without my permission. She destroyed it. And now she's blaming me? Robert didn't flinch. He just scribbled something on his clipboard and said, "The board will review this. For now, you should prepare yourself. This could get expensive." Expensive. That word hit me like a hammer. I work hard. I pay my bills. I'm not rich, but I take pride in what I have. And now, because of Karen, I was facing the possibility of paying for an entire house repair? It felt insane. But Karen wasn't done. Not even close. Later that evening, as I sat on my porch trying to calm down, 2 police officers showed up. They knocked on my door, hats in their hands, and asked me to come outside for a chat. I stepped out, heart pounding. One officer said, "Sir, we've received a report about property damage. We're here to understand your side." I told them everything. From the history of the tree to the chainsaws to Karen's smile as it fell. I explained how it wasn't me. How I had proof it was my land. How I never gave permission. The officers nodded politely, but I could see it in their eyes. They'd heard Karen's story first. And Karen's story sounded very different from mine. Apparently, she told them I had ignored repeated warnings. That I had neglected a dangerous tree. That she was the victim of my carelessness. And now, her house was proof. It was like I had entered some twisted nightmare where the truth didn't matter. Where Karen's lies had more weight than my facts. But I wasn't about to roll over. Not for her. Not for the HOA. Not for anyone. The next day, I started gathering evidence. Old photographs of me as a kid under that tree. Land survey papers proving it stood entirely on my property. Professional inspection reports showing the tree was healthy. Everything I could find. I put it all together like a case file. Because that's what it had become. A case. Me versus Karen. But while I worked, Karen spread her poison. She went door to door, talking to neighbors. She told them I was reckless. That I endangered the community. That I should be removed from the HOA. And slowly, I noticed the looks. People I had known for years now looked at me like I was the problem. Like I was the villain of the neighborhood. It burned inside me. How one person's lies could spread like wildfire. How quickly neighbors could turn against you. And then, the letter came. It was from the HOA board. Formal. Cold. It said, due to negligence, you may be held responsible for damages to Ms. Karen's property. Please prepare for a hearing. A hearing. Like I was on trial. I sat at my kitchen table, letter in my hand, and felt the weight of it all. The anger. The betrayal. The fear. But beneath it all, I also felt something else. Resolve. I wasn't going to let Karen win. Not this time. Not ever. I started making calls. A lawyer. An arborist. Even the county land office. If Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get one. And I wasn't walking into that hearing alone. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept pacing my living room, going over the evidence again and again. Outside, the yard looked empty without the old oak tree. Like a piece of my soul had been ripped out. But inside, a fire was building. I was ready. And yet, even as I prepared, one thought haunted me. If Karen was willing to go this far already, what else was she capable of? What do you think, friends, if your HOA turned against you, and your neighbor spread lies about you, would you stand and fight like I did, or would you try to walk away from the drama? Tell me honestly in the comments, because I need to know what you would have done. The morning of the hearing arrived, and my stomach was in knots. I had been in stressful situations before, but this felt different. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't even just about a tree. It was about my name, my dignity, and my right to stand on my own land without being treated like a criminal. The HOA office was just a small brick building near the community pool. I walked in holding a folder stuffed with papers, my evidence, my defense, my truth. Inside, the room was cold. A long table stretched across the center. At one end sat the board members, 5 of them, stiff, serious, and ready to judge. Karen was already there. sitting straight, her arms crossed, lips tight, looking like she was about to enjoy a victory. She didn't even glance at me. She didn't need to. She thought the room was already hers. Robert, the HOA president, cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. Today we'll discuss the matter of property damage involving Mr. David's tree and Ms. Karen's house. My tree. Her house. Already, the framing of the story burned in my ears. Karen was the first to speak. And oh, did she perform. She put on her sad voice. She sighed loudly. She talked about how terrified she was living next to my tree. She told them she begged me to remove it. She claimed I ignored her. She called it a hazard waiting to happen. And then, with crocodile tears glistening in her eyes, she said, and then it finally happened. His tree crushed my home. My safe space. My sanctuary. Now I'm the victim, and I have nowhere to turn. The board members nodded slowly. They scribbled notes. They whispered to each other. And me? I sat there clenching my fists under the table, biting my tongue, waiting for my turn. When Robert finally said, "David, do you have a response?" I almost jumped out of my chair. I laid out everything. The property records that proved the tree was on my land. The inspection reports showing it was strong and healthy. The photos of me and my family under it through the years. I even had a statement from the arborist saying the tree was never in danger of falling until it was cut down. I looked every board member in the eye and said, that tree didn't fall because of nature. It didn't fall because of me. It fell because Karen hired workers, cut it down without my permission, and left it in a dangerous position. If anyone is responsible for her house, it's her. For a moment, the room was silent. I thought maybe they would see reason. But then Karen leaned forward, smirked, and dropped her bomb. She pulled out a letter. A single sheet of paper. It was stamped and signed by the HOA board itself. It was an approval letter. A document stating that she had permission to remove a hazardous tree. The problem? It didn't mention the tree's location clearly. It was vague. And it looked official. Robert took it, frowned, and said, "This complicates things." Complicates things? It was my land. My tree. My rights. And yet, a piece of paper was enough to muddy the water. I spoke up again, my voice louder this time. That letter doesn't give her the right to step on my land. It doesn't give her the right to destroy my property. You can't approve something that isn't yours to approve. But I could see it, the hesitation in their faces. They didn't want to side against one of their own. They didn't want to admit they'd made a mistake. And in that moment, I realized the game was rigged. Karen wasn't just fighting me. She had the board on her side. She had their signatures. Their power. Their backing. And me? I was just one homeowner. I left that room shaking with rage. My evidence had been ignored. My voice had been drowned out. The hearing ended with further review, which really meant they would drag me through this for as long as they could. But I wasn't beaten. Not yet. Because outside that office, waiting in my car, was someone they didn't expect. My lawyer. A friend of mine had recommended him, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes. The kind of man who looked like he had fought battles tougher than this and won them all. When I slid into the passenger seat, he asked, "How bad was it?" I told him everything. He listened quietly, nodding, his hands folded on the steering wheel. And when I finished, he gave me a small smile and said, "Good. Let them think they won. Because in court, that letter won't mean a thing." For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. This wasn't over. Not even close. But while I prepared for the legal fight, Karen continued her campaign. She spread rumors at community barbecues. She whispered in neighbors' ears during morning walks. Suddenly, people who used to wave at me stopped waving. Some even crossed the street to avoid me. It hurt. More than I wanted to admit. Because this wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about trust. About living in a neighborhood that now saw me as the enemy. And yet, every time I felt like giving up. I looked at the spot in my yard where my oak tree once stood. The stump was still there. Solid. Unmoving. A reminder that even when you cut something down, its roots still run deep. And so did mine. Tell me something, friends, if your neighbor and your HOA teamed up against you, would you take them to court and fight, or would you pack up and leave the neighborhood behind? Drop your answer below, I'm curious what kind of fighter you'd be. The first time I stepped into the courthouse, I felt a mixture of fear and fire. The marble floors echoed with every step I took. The air smelled faintly of paper and polish. People whispered in the halls, lawyers carried stacks of files, and I was just one man walking into a battle I never asked for. My lawyer walked beside me, calm as ever. "Don't worry," he said softly, "truth has a way of standing taller than lies." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that justice was stronger than Karen's games. When we entered the courtroom, my heart skipped. There she was again. Karen. Dressed sharply, acting like she was the hero of this story. She sat there with her own lawyer, whispering, smirking, glancing at me like she'd already won. The judge entered, and the room went silent. My hands gripped the folder of evidence so tightly I thought the paper would tear. Karen's lawyer spoke first. He was smooth, polished, the kind of man who could sell ice in winter. He painted Karen as the victim. He said she acted out of concern for safety. He described her as a responsible neighbor who did what she thought was best for the community. And then he gestured toward the photographs of her ruined house. Broken roof. Shattered windows. A home turned into wreckage. It was a powerful picture, but it was a picture missing the truth. Then came my turn. My lawyer stood tall, cleared his throat, and said, "Your Honor, what you see before you is not a case of negligence. It is a case of trespass. Of interference. Of a neighbor who overstepped boundaries, literally." He laid it all out. The property records showing the tree was on my land. The inspection reports confirming the tree was healthy. The photos of me and my family over decades, living with that oak like it was part of us. And finally, the arborist's statement, confirming the tree did not fall naturally but was cut down. As he spoke, I watched the judge's face. Stern, unreadable, but listening closely. Then, my lawyer delivered the blow. He held up the letter Karen had waved around at the HOA hearing. "This so-called approval," he said, "is not valid. The HOA cannot grant authority over land it does not own. This letter gave her no right to touch my client's property. None." For the first time, I saw Karen's smirk falter. Her lawyer jumped up, objecting, arguing, twisting words. But the judge cut him off. "I will decide what is relevant," the judge said firmly. And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, I felt the scales tip ever so slightly in my favor. But Karen wasn't done. She wasn't the type to admit defeat. When it was her turn to testify, she turned on the charm. She spoke sweetly. She looked the judge in the eye. She talked about how scared she had been, how she couldn't sleep knowing the tree might fall, how she acted only to protect her family. It was a performance worthy of an actress. And some people in the courtroom even nodded along. But then, she slipped. She said, "I told the workers to hurry and cut it before David noticed." He would have never agreed otherwise. The room went silent. Her own words spilled out without her realizing what they meant. My lawyer seized it. "So you admit you ordered workers onto land that wasn't yours? You admit you did it without his permission?" Karen froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried to backtrack. She tried to twist it. But the damage was done. For the first time, she looked nervous. And I felt something I hadn't felt since the day this nightmare began. Hope. The hearing ended with the judge saying he needed time to review the evidence. The decision wouldn't come immediately. But as I walked out of that courthouse, I knew one thing for certain. Karen's perfect story had cracks in it now. Still, the waiting was brutal. Days turned into weeks. Every time the phone rang, my chest tightened. Every letter in the mailbox made my palms sweat. Meanwhile, Karen didn't stop her games. She spread more lies. She told neighbors I was dragging her through court just to punish her. Some people believed her. Some didn't. But the whispers never stopped. It was exhausting. Like living under a shadow that followed me everywhere. And yet, I refused to bend. Because this wasn't just about a house or a tree anymore. It was about principle. About standing up when someone tries to walk all over you. Finally, the call came. The judge's decision was ready. I sat in my lawyer's office, hands sweating, heart pounding. He opened the envelope, scanned the paper, and then looked at me with the faintest smile. "She lost," he said. "She's liable. Not you." I felt my body sag with relief. After all the lies, the smirks, the shouting, finally, the truth had stood tall. But before I could even celebrate, my lawyer added, "Don't relax yet. She can appeal. And knowing her, she probably will." And sure enough, she did. Karen wasn't done. Not even after losing in court. Because people like her never admit they're wrong. They just look for the next battle. If you were in my shoes, and your neighbor kept fighting even after losing in court, what would you do? Would you keep battling every step of the way, or would you take the win and move on? I really want to hear your thoughts in the comments. You would think after losing in court, Karen would finally stop. That maybe she'd admit her mistake, repair her house, and move on with her life. But people like her, they don't stop. They double down. The very next week, I woke up to find something strange in my yard. A letter pinned to my front door with tape. No envelope. No stamp. Just bold handwriting in red marker. "You may have fooled the judge, but you won't fool the neighborhood." My stomach twisted as I read it. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature. I knew exactly who it was from. Karen had lost in court, but she was now fighting a different kind of battle. A battle of reputation. A battle of whispers. Everywhere I went, I could feel it. Neighbors looking at me differently. Some nodding with sympathy, others shaking their heads as if I was the villain. Karen had been busy. At the grocery store, I overheard two women in the next aisle. "Did you hear about David?" one whispered. "Karen says he ruined her house and then dragged her through court just to humiliate her." The other gasped. Some people just don't know how to be decent neighbors. I stood there, frozen, holding a carton of milk, realizing my own community was being poisoned against me. And Karen? She thrived on it. I would see her outside, waving to people, laughing, telling her version of the story. She was winning the social war even if she lost the legal one. Then came the vandalism. First, it was small things. Trash scattered across my lawn. Weeds mysteriously pulled from my garden. Mail missing from my box. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it could be kids or just bad luck. But then, one morning, I found the word liar spray painted across my fence. That was no accident. That was targeted. I reported it to the police, of course. But without proof, what could they do? They nodded, took notes, and left. Meanwhile, I stood staring at the red letters dripping across my fence like blood. Karen watched from her porch, smiling. That was the moment I realized, this wasn't just about her house anymore. This was personal. She wanted to break me. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I called a neighborhood meeting. If Karen wanted to control the narrative, I was going to challenge it. I gathered every neighbor I could and invited them to my yard. I stood near the stump of my oak tree, the scar in the ground that started it all. When everyone arrived, I told the story, start to finish. Not the twisted version Karen spread, but the truth. I showed them the court ruling. I showed them the inspection reports. I showed them the photographs of my family under that tree, going back decades. I spoke from the heart. I told them how much the tree meant to me, how deeply it hurt to lose it, how painful it was to be blamed for something I didn't do. And for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in their eyes. Maybe they had been too quick to believe Karen. Maybe they realized there were two sides to the story. But of course, Karen wasn't silent for long. She stormed into the meeting, shouting, pointing her finger at me, accusing me of manipulating everyone. Her voice was shrill, her words venomous. But this time, something shifted. The neighbors didn't all nod in agreement. Some frowned. Some even walked away. She was losing her grip. And that's when she decided to strike harder. A week later, I received a notice in the mail. Not from the HOA board. Not from Karen directly. But from a lawyer, another lawsuit. Karen was suing me personally. Claiming emotional distress. She said I had harassed her by defending myself. That I had turned the community against her. That she was now living in fear. Fear? The woman who cut down my tree, lied about me, vandalized my fence, poisoned my reputation, was claiming SHE was the victim again. It was almost laughable, if it hadn't been so exhausting. My lawyer shook his head when he read the papers. This is what she does, he said. She lost once, so now she's trying another angle. She thinks if she keeps dragging you into court, eventually you'll give up. But giving up wasn't in my blood. My grandfather planted that oak tree. My father protected it. And now, even though it was gone, I wasn't going to let its legacy die under Karen's lies. So I prepared again. More paperwork. More hearings. More sleepless nights. And yet, even as I gathered my strength, I couldn't help but wonder. How far was Karen willing to go? What would she try next? And how much more could I take before I broke? Tell me honestly, friends, if a neighbor kept attacking you with lies, lawsuits, and sabotage, would you keep standing tall and fighting back, or would you pack your bags and start fresh somewhere else? I'd love to know what you would do. The second lawsuit drained me in ways I can hardly explain. It wasn't just the money for lawyers, it was the weight of it all. Every time I thought I could breathe again, Karen found a way to tighten the noose. Every day I checked my mail, my stomach twisted. Every time the phone rang, I braced for bad news. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering how one neighbor could cause so much destruction. Not just to my yard, not just to my wallet, but to my peace. And yet, despite the exhaustion, I kept fighting. Because every time I thought about walking away, I'd picture my grandfather's hands, rough and strong as he planted that oak tree in the soil. I'd hear my father's voice, telling me, stand tall, son. Even in the storm. And I knew giving up wasn't an option. The day of the second hearing arrived, and once again, I found myself in that same cold courtroom. This time, Karen looked different. Not smug. Not confident. But desperate. Her hair was messy, her eyes hollow, and her smile, forced. She was unraveling. And I realized something, maybe this war was breaking her too. Her lawyer spoke, throwing out phrases like emotional distress and community harassment. He painted me as some sort of bully who had turned the neighborhood against poor, innocent Karen. But the truth was louder. And this time, I had witnesses. One by one, neighbors stepped forward. The Smiths, who lived across the street, testified that Karen was the one spreading rumors. Mrs. Johnson, an older woman from the corner house, said she'd seen Karen near my fence the night it was vandalized. Even a teenager admitted he overheard Karen bragging about making David pay. Piece by piece, her mask cracked. And then it was my turn to speak. I stood before the judge, my voice steady but my chest pounding. I said, Your Honor, I am not a perfect man. But I am a homeowner who has been pushed, lied about, and harassed for months. All because of a tree. A tree that stood on my land, healthy and strong, until Karen decided it shouldn't exist. And now she wants to destroy me too. But I refuse to be her victim. The courtroom was silent. Even Karen's lawyer looked uneasy. When Karen herself took the stand, she tried her usual act. Tears. Sighs. Claims of being unsafe and targeted. But this time, the cracks were too big to hide. Her voice trembled. Her story didn't line up. And when pressed, she snapped, shouting at my lawyer, at the judge, even at the neighbors sitting behind me. It was the first time the world saw Karen without her mask. Not a victim. Not a protector. Just a bitter, angry woman drowning in her own lies. By the end of the hearing, the judge's patience had worn thin. He looked at her, then at me, and said, "This case is dismissed. The plaintiff has failed to provide credible evidence. And I strongly suggest both parties reconsider how they choose to live within their community." Dismissed. The sweetest word I had ever heard. But even as relief washed over me, I knew it wasn't the end. Because Karen wasn't the type to apologize. She wasn't the type to back down gracefully. And I feared what she might do once the gavel came down and the courtroom emptied. Sure enough, the fallout came fast. That night, I found a dead plant tossed onto my porch. A small thing, maybe, but I knew what it meant. A message. A warning. She wasn't done. And yet, something had changed. Neighbors who once avoided me now nodded in support. Some even came to my door to say they were sorry for believing her lies. The truth was finally spreading. Slowly, painfully, but spreading. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of living in enemy territory. Every time I stepped outside, I wondered if she was watching from her window. Every time I heard a noise at night, I wondered if she was planning her next move. It wears on you. It makes you question everything. It makes you wonder how much one person can take before they break. And maybe that's the point. Karen couldn't win in court, so now she wanted to win by wearing me down. By turning my home into a prison of stress. But here's the truth I've learned. When someone tries to bury you under lies, under lawsuits, under hatred, you don't crumble. You grow roots. You dig deeper. And you rise stronger. Because bullies only win when we let them. So tell me, friends, if you were living next to someone like Karen, would you stay and fight for your home no matter the cost, or would you sell everything, leave it behind, and find peace somewhere new? I really want to hear your honest answer. I thought the second lawsuit being dismissed would finally bring me peace. For a moment, it did. But the truth is, when someone like Karen loses in front of the world, they don't just walk away. They burn hotter. The very next week, I woke up to shouting outside. I looked through my window and saw Karen standing in the middle of the street, yelling at two neighbors who had defended me in court. She accused them of betraying the community, of ganging up on her. Her voice cracked, her hands shook, and for the first time, I saw not power in her eyes, but desperation. She wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was fighting everyone. And slowly, people began to pull away from her. The same neighbors who once believed her lies now avoided her. Mothers walked their kids on the opposite side of the street. The invitations she once handed out for block parties stopped being accepted. Her power was slipping. But that didn't make her harmless. One night, I came home late from work and found her standing on my lawn. Just standing there, in the dark, staring at the stump of my old oak tree. When my headlights hit her, she didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just turned her head slowly toward me, and smiled. That smile chilled me more than anything else she had done. I stepped out of the car and said, "Karen, get off my property." She whispered, "This isn't over," then walked away into the shadows. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside made me jump. But here's the strange thing, the longer this battle dragged on, the less afraid I became. Because somewhere deep down, I realized something important. Karen had already lost. Not in court, not in money, not even in property. She lost because she had let hate consume her. And I refused to let it consume me. Weeks passed, and her anger grew louder, but emptier. The HOA board, tired of the drama, began ignoring her complaints. Neighbors stopped listening to her stories. She was isolated in her own little war. And then, one day, karma came knocking. It was another stormy night, heavy winds tearing through the neighborhood. Lightning flashed, thunder shook the ground. I watched from my window, memories flooding back of the night my oak had fallen. But this time, it wasn't my land that suffered. It was Karen's. A massive branch from a different tree, one on her property, snapped in the wind and crashed straight into her carport. Metal twisted. Wood splintered. Her shiny new SUV crushed under the weight. I rushed outside with other neighbors when we heard the noise. Karen stood in the rain, staring at the wreckage, her mouth open in shock. For a brief moment, I felt pity. Because I knew that feeling. I knew the heartbreak of watching something you care about be destroyed in an instant. But then, she looked at me. And even through the storm, I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to blame me again. But this time, she couldn't. Because everyone saw it. Everyone knew it was her own tree, her own property, her own problem. And that was the night Karen's story ended. She stopped filing complaints. She stopped spreading rumors. She stopped showing up at HOA meetings. It was like the storm had taken more than her carport. It had taken her fight. Life slowly returned to normal. Neighbors started waving again. People came by my porch to chat, to apologize, even to share their own frustrations with HOA nonsense. And little by little, the weight lifted from my shoulders. But the stump in my yard never let me forget. That oak was gone forever. Its branches would never again shade my home, its roots would never grow deeper. It had been stolen from me. And yet, in a way, it still lived on. Because that tree taught me something. It taught me that strength isn't about standing tall when times are easy. It's about holding firm when the storm rages. It's about digging your roots deep enough that no matter who tries to cut you down, you rise again. Karen may have taken my tree. She may have tried to take my peace. But she didn't win. Because I refused to let her. And now, every time I look at that empty space in my yard, I don't just see loss. I see survival. I see resilience. I see a reminder that no matter how bitter or destructive someone else can be, they can't destroy your spirit unless you let them. So tell me, friends, if you were in my shoes, standing on that porch after everything, would you feel pity for a neighbor like Karen after karma finally caught up with her? Or would you simply smile and call it justice? I'd love to know your honest thoughts.